Nights of the Hunt 1. Caddock could not help but feel it to be a great shame that he never could operate from a sprawling and alive workshop, standing within its proper, now vacant and void. He had never considered a place to be so wrong in its current state. For while all the pretty stargazer lilies remained alive, life was in reality gone from the place. He would have liked to have seen it and all its hunters, and to be able to train under German. But having hunted the hunters for years, until he was no longer able to do it properly, the notion came upon him with clarity in the old workshop where he stood among the lilies, that he made a poor hunter. Though he knew little of Fiachra, he was able to tell that in comparison, the man had just slightly less compassion than he. Every hunter sent off had been a despair-filled farewell. Now he felt pity for the one taking his place, but he had come to know that it had to be done. To label it as an escape felt both belittling and genuinely wrong to him, but since the phrasing had all the same come up in his mind, it must have been accurate in some sense. His arm, now suffering a terrible reoccurring ache, unable to wield the blade of mercy with the grace it deserved, it was only a matter of time before he made his last mistake. And then again, he had come to know that his compassion could be fiendishly deceptive. Hopefully, someone just a little less graced would carry the duty better. He walked into the workshop building, where some items had since vanished. The curious doll still sat in its corner, and he was emboldened, now being alone, to approach it. It was very lifelike, but with such complexion it was no doubt to be a doll. But to have such ability with molding the porcelain-like clay to form such delicate curves in the face was a masterwork. He wondered who it was supposed to depict. With the ashen hair, pale complexion and flawless features, the woman of inspiration was either of unparalleled beauty, or said beauty had been exaggerated in the making. Perhaps he should have asked the alive duplicate in the dream, but the thought had only just struck him. Before the stone altar towards the end of the room, he retrieved a small silver box. He peeked inside one last time at the slightly damp and grey worm shape laying curled within, lined with ice. He placed it in the middle of the stone surface upon a cloth. Having to part with it was the most defeating. He had never imagined himself relinquishing a task once undertaken. But what was there to do, when he could not properly do it? Escape once again appeared in his thoughts, like a taunting shout echoing around. His arm began to ache while he retrieved a package of new gear he had prepared for his heir and walked outside. He sat down upon the elevated foundation of the building, just outside a side door, with his legs dangling from it. After some moments passed, he thought to light up his pipe. While he waited, he envisioned himself as a normal hunter, one that properly shared the camaraderie he had seen the church hunters engaged in. He saw himself walk through the workshop he was in now, but while it was alive. To hunt beasts was noble indeed, the peak of playing the heroic role. But naturally, as he had learned once before back home, reality seldom deigns to be as pleasant as more mundane things. The kind that, after all is said and done, seem to shine the brightest in one's memory. Brighter than all the grand deeds filled with purpose fit for legends. He thought that, at the end of his own story, it would be this moment he remembered particularly. Him, sitting in the pleasant workshop. The thoughts were so pleasant to him that even though he heard footsteps approaching, he lingered in them a little longer. Caddock stepped through his entry door and closed it behind him. He relinquished his hat onto the stand in the small entry space, which only stretched for 6 or 7 feet, before transitioning into a steep flight of stairs. Beneath his hat he hung his crumpled and slightly torn coat. Then he began the climb up the precarious steps. He entered into his kitchen, where he stopped for a moment. In the same instant he did not realize why, and he looked around the large room stretching out rectangularly on his left side, where sunlight entered through a window onto an empty floor, a small table up against the wall with 2 chairs. He did not let a thought pass by. He only stood. The years of retirement had definitely dulled his hunter's senses, and he realized it very slowly. He had heard a noise behind him, down the stairs and behind the door. He became aware, as he turned to look down the stairs, that someone was standing beyond, shifting its position. He examined the 2 narrow shadows falling in through the lower gap, how they pensively moved side to side in nervous steps. He began to wonder when exactly the person would be knocking, or however else announced themselves. 3 low knocks came, and he instantly answered them. "Yes?" The voice on the other side was so timid and muffled that he could not possibly hope to hear any words, as it all sounded more akin to a whining cartwheel. While he stepped down, the faint sound continued up until he opened the door. A fashionably dressed woman jumped out of its way as it brushed past her, appearing as if she had not anticipated the door would ever be opened for her. He looked at her, while she stared at his feet. "Yes?"
Apologies. Is this the residence of Mr. Caddock?
Speaking. She blushed.
Oh, you see, the matter is quite delicate. May I come in?
He nodded his head inward and stepped back up 4 steps. She followed him and carefully closed the door, looking as if coming into a warm house from a blizzard, despite it being early summer.
My name is Lillian. It is a pleasure to meet you, sir.
She curtsied and he waved awkwardly with his right hand, while keeping his left stiffly by his side.
I hear words that you are very well connected. That you know many things. Is that right, sir?
A growing distress revealed itself in her tone. He nodded, and as soon as he did, she fell on her knees as if something had shoved her in the back. He remained unfazed by her sudden gesture.
I cannot bear it. No longer I can bear it. I must know. I must know what has become of him.
She looked up at him with a face now red and eyes wild from grief.
None can help. None will help. Life cannot be so cruel. People don't just disappear, especially my James. I went to the church, then to the hunters. None can help. Curse them! They must do something. Someone must do something.
She composed herself slightly, while still plainly being fully immersed in her ailing sorrow.
People don't just disappear.
She stared intensely at him, and gradually her expression became soft, bewildered. He could only look down at her where she grovelled with a slightly upturned brow. It was truly marvelling how so many people could make the exact same face, despite who they were. But the fact was no longer amusing, for he preferred to see it no longer, despite knowing he likely would never be free from the sight in his life. He sighed, stepped down to her level, and reached for her hand. It was more a decisive motion than a helpful gesture that brought her back on her feet. He nodded once more back behind him and started up the stairs. She remained below for a moment of hesitation before clumsy feet followed him. He continued straight forward, in through a door, into a room with dark grey tapestry. A small windowless office where a giant board upon the wall outclassed a meager desk in size. Lillian's mouth opened slightly when she saw it, and she froze in the doorway. Upon it were excerpts from many days of papers, sloppy handwritten notes, documents with many kinds of seals, as well with documents of more obscure origins, and even the occasional hand-drawn face. She must have understood upon first sight, for a long list of names made it obvious, and he turned to her fully. "James, you said?" Her eyes lingered before she broke away, concealing a tear, and nodded. "Very well. Let's sit down and talk about him and the circumstances of his disappearance. Kadok walked down the street with head low in thought. Occasionally he peered up towards someone walking past. They would look away once he did, from having stared blatantly at him. His thoughts reminisced on a time when people did not yet possess that mania in their eyes, when he had just arrived as a foreigner. But perhaps it was fitting, he thought, that all would become as such. Their town had changed as well, growing into a monstrosity of legendary proportions. No wonder the locals could not keep up, now that everyone was a noble in a sense. A town graced by gods, having been granted their essence. How should one properly adapt to such a notion? Personally, he did not like walking down the streets. Everyone had changed into something worse, hollowed out by fear. Yet he could never truly place from where such fear would spring. In theory, living in such a wealthy town, with the pinnacle of health available just around the corner, having access to the voice of God, protected by noble and chivalrous defenders that kept monsters of sin at bay, what more could be desired? But here they were, the overindulged and, dare one say, spoiled citizens of Yharnam, living their lives and walking its streets in fear. He turned down into a narrow alley. Wooden planks and barrels stood against the dead end, as well as heaps of bricks lay as if swept away directly from the street and out of sight. He stepped around the debris, looked up at a brick wall that marked its end with a black metal barred fence atop. He effortlessly stepped up on his right wall. Having jumped with such momentum, he leapt onto the other wall until he grabbed the ledge and swung himself over with only his right hand. He landed on grass behind a bush, peering through small trees with thin trunks into a garden where white stargazer lilies grew. When the comfort of his Yharnam home became too suffocating and his thoughts bounced loudly against his walls, the old workshop was the only place for him, where his thoughts yearned to be. But today, he saw a figure standing on the little cobblestone path at the base of the workshop building. The back of a black-garbed person, completely enveloped by a long feather cape and a pointed hat atop. The head turned, revealing only the silhouette of a woman's face looking his way. She turned back towards the building she had initially looked upon and donned a beaked mask. Kadok emerged from the quaint tree line and made a small leap down from the rise he had landed upon, down onto the cobbled path that ran through the garden. Why in the world would you come to this abandoned place? He called while approaching. The beaked mask abruptly turned his way, realizing who he was. Kadok. Of course you would linger in the past. She spoke in the same dialect as he, although a bit more pronounced. Her tone of voice had a constant hint of superiority, coming from someone that seemingly looked down on everyone she came across. That I would. So why would the young stick around? He stepped up beside her to join in the beholding of the outdated workshop. She looked up towards the building and sighed. Well, it has recently felt relevant. Ah, I see. Well, I would also be coming here if I were you. Steering clear of the church workshop. She nodded, the beak still aimed forward. I got the impression you were leaving, but I've seen you skulking around the streets these past years. I imagined you would return home. He chuckled, making her turn her head. Home. When you forcibly retire, home just becomes wherever you end up. Many of us do not imagine a life after the hunt. No, can you speak for them? Those that one day may turn into prey. I hunted with some of them. Sometimes, you know. So yes, I would say I can. But I wouldn't recommend it. What? Could not resist fighting alongside the great Ludwig? She said mockingly, but he was not fazed by it. He is an inspiration, one of a kind. I would consider him a friend. Perhaps it was wise. Easier to detect early. He nodded, agreeing quietly. It was. I think I honored some of them. Made it even cleaner, but... He was silenced by the recollection of the faces seen from behind the eyes of the beaked mask. Those memories felt just like a nightmare, constantly glaring at him every waking moment. Some of them he knew from the start what their fate would be. Those he did not remember as well. Those that surprised him, however, would never relinquish their gaze. He cares deeply for his men. Her speaking made him feel like waking up, and he almost lost balance. That Ludwig? Too much to know what's good for them. Be wary around them. The church hunters. They are all church hunters, Caddock. I know, but they are not all beasts. She scoffed and glanced towards him. No, but those that are, I tell you, are not subtle about it. Makes me almost pity the captain for not seeing it. generously donated to the healing church by Charles Felwind. The brave lad lay down his life for the hunting companionship with the captain Ludwig, the Holy Blade. In the uphill battle against the Scourge did he find his rest in the most commemorative ways, as hunters told. Church hunters added that his home will now be demolished to make way for a cemetery, with plans of naming the site after our fallen brother. They went on saying that the Holy Choir of the Healing Church is likely to hold a ceremony of consecration upon its opening as a hallowed final respite for any future lives given to the gods in the blessed battle. So read the daily paper. Caddock looked out through the window, thinking about the man mentioned. He shrugged and thought of it no more, becoming instead morbidly amused by the fact that more dead people seemed to be living in Yarnum, seeing how houses became grave sites. Loud banging came upon his door. He folded the paper and gulped down the last lukewarm tea in his cup before heaving himself from the chair to greet the visitor. At the top of the descending steps he shouted, "It's open!" He turned to enter his office. The person who he anticipated was Lillian hesitated before opening. The familiar footsteps started immediately up the stairs. "See that it's locked!" he shouted back, and the woman shuffled around to turn the key. Soon, she too stood in the office in a plain brown dress, with a green vest over a white shirt, with its sleeves rolled up. "Did you bring the key?" Her eyebrows jolted upwards, and she was about to turn when he stopped her with a dismissive wave and a loud grunt. "So?"
"I spoke with his mate. He told that they had indeed walked home that night. Not as intoxicated as we first thought. He sounded like he remembered it rather well. There was an earnestness to his tone."
An earnest tone, you say? He said thoughtfully, and stared straight, but without focus, at the crowded board.
"Yes."
"And what is he saying? Is he as concerned as you?"
"Well, he has been rather indulgent lately. A newfound fondness for crimson schnapps."
"Ah, I see."
"Oh, he grieves, I'm sure, but in his own way."
Let's hope it does not lead him anywhere. So your missing man, as claimed, disappeared while relatively sober. With a pen, he added the new information upon a paper with the headline, James.
"He was never a drinker. Not with any such commitment."
He nodded and thought for a bit. "You see," he pointed to another list of names. "Hunters. Every one of them. Now, all you need to know is that hunters do most certainly not disappear quite like your husband here. Even if they would, the captain, and in extension, the church, keeps close tabs on them. So you can imagine my astonishment when the captain himself said He had no idea where these ones had run off to.
The captain? The Holy Blade himself?
He nodded. Her wide, astonished eyes turned towards the grand board and transformed with worry and uncertainty.
Wouldn't they know? I mean, the church hunters? They keep us. Have they no explanation?
Not that I know of.
Well then, what can we do?
Your man, with the information you came with, falls into a pattern I've noticed. Oh, well, pattern might not cut it. Just some similarities is all. But the short of it, the church hunters have long now been keenly aware about the people, so anyone that falls outside of their knowledge must thus also fall outside the church's knowledge. This leads to two possible scenarios, as you can see here. He pointed to a large question mark drawn upon a paper that had several strands of threads connected with some of the below notes, all bearing a name. He also, with his wide indication, hinted towards the adjacent paper with the simple but large written word, church. The explanation is either that someone is doing away with a bunch of people that the church is unaware of, or that the church themselves has knowledge of these incidents and intentionally withholds them from even the hunters.
What? How can you even suggest such a thing? The church would never.
I'm not saying they do, damn it. It is only the second most plausible conclusion.
He interrupted her like a scolding master would his student, then shook his head.
Gods, if we want to find you, man, you cannot make up in your head who's right and wrong.
She still appeared startled by the mere thought, but had composed herself by the temptation of finding her dearest. Kadok continued.
My theory is that someone is not doing this alone, but organized with a group of experts. Making people disappear is actually quite difficult, and my hunch says that a certain rundown settlement just outside of town might be responsible.
You mean Hemwick? He nodded and smiled faintly.
I do indeed. That place has not been the same since Cainhurst went quiet. I imagine so many years without a liege will turn some deplorable individuals into strange acts. Even kidnapping. But there is nothing confirming this, other than the inhabitants being incredibly shifty, and no one to my knowledge have been snatched from that place.
I hear only witches live in Hemwick. Witches that steal people's eyes at night, but that must only be wives' tales, no? He could not help but chuckle.
Nothing like that. They are just an estranged bunch. But every story has a seed of truth to it. Or so I'd like to believe. Perhaps there is something strange happening in Emwick. He thought silently on the fact, while looking particularly at the names not connected with a thread to the question mark. Then he turned back to Lillian. Perhaps you would be interested in speeding along the process, he asked leeringly, which immediately provoked a strong reaction, suggesting her willingness.
Oh, anything. Whatever I can do, I must try.
That's a good spot. Now I won't be sending you to Hemwick, but if you would visit these one's relatives. I myself haven't gotten around to do it. He pointed to the threadless names. It's quite a process, and no one can be overlooked. These ones might yet give a clue that can definitely link a kidnapping to Hemwick. He looked at the notes, and a determined frown came over her, of such a proportion that he thought to behold an entirely different person.
Of course, I'll see to it.
Very good. Now, you might have to employ some level of tactics to get them to talk straight. You might be surprised at how many may be skeptically inclined.
Don't you worry. Can I?
She hesitantly reached a pointing hand towards the desk and the board, to which he waved her off dismissively while moving towards the door. Look through it all while you're at it. The second right drawer holds the unresolved people's information. She immediately sat down and opened it.
Oh, but where are you off to?
She remarked, looking back at him descending the stairs. While you do that, I'll be heading to make further inquiries at the church workshop. Caddock stepped through the entrance from the graveyard into Elden Chapel, where only one other visitor was sitting quietly in the back row of 4 benches that together were positioned along both walls in 2 rows. There was no depiction of the deity that provided its namesake, formless as he was. Rather, it served as a quiet place for contemplation. At the opposite end lay a double door, from which a woman now emerged and spotted him quickly. He had not seen her there before, but then again, some time had passed since the last visit. She was much less formally dressed, bearing a neat long dress with a black holy shawl over her shoulders. She quickly and smilingly approached.
Blessings unto you, sir. What is your light in these dark nights, may I ask?
The light of the holy blades. Is the captain present? She looked surprised by his bluntness.
Oh, I believe so. Is the choir asking for him?
I'm the one asking. He noticed that her eyes remained maturely fixed on him, contradictory to her innocent, cheery smile. He moved away from her towards the inconspicuous door at the left wall, before the elevated part of the floor on which the benches stood. She followed him and unlocked the door and came in after as he entered, locking it again as she closed. He hurried away from her and ascended up to the level above that led him out to a small bridge, joining with the 8-sided tower that was the church workshop. Despite never preferring it over the old garden workshop, the comforting sensation of seeing the trick weapons along the walls, men and women cleaning out their firearms, the otherwise brusque faces growing softer as they greeted him quietly, still made his heart lighter. Most of them were strangers, being mostly young rascals in his eyes, that knew not the proper hunting etiquettes, such as hunting with face covers. He turned right and ascended a stairwell running along the wall to the higher floor. Coming down in the opposite direction was a man that provoked an involuntary smile, mimicked in the man's own face, once he too recognized who he was about to pass.
What are you doing here, old codger? Thought you retired.
Henrik said, the only one there that still looked like a hunter of old, with his feathered tricone, withdrawn face mask and old-fashioned yellow overcoat.
Bah! I thought the same about you. Never knew you for skulking about the church workshop. You know, the old piece needs its maintenance from time to time.
He patted his holstered pistol at his belt.
They still have the proper tools, right? Or have they all resorted to solely swinging about their bricks of stone? Well, almost.
The two of them walked up the stairs and stopped along the wall. The second level was much more leisurely decorated, with a giant table with chairs in the center, as well as other apparels, such as a primitive kitchen counter and some shelves with books.
Honestly, Henrik, I have no clue how you keep up. The hunt is still the same in the sense it needs to be done. Less talk only improves it. I suppose. Who knows? Had not the arm been busted, then perhaps things would be different. Here to maintain your practice? No. I have some more questions about Hunter's disappearing. Can't help you there, friend. Ludwig is up above. I'm on my way home. Do not let me keep you then. Well, I suppose you can stop by, you know. Maybe I will. Give my regards. See you around then, Kadok.
Henrik waved his hand and walked past him downwards. Walking up the second flight of stairs along the wall, he came into a less bustling area with several desks, and appropriate clutter making it more similar to an office of sorts. Captain Ludwig, the Holy Blade, stood with one hand leaning against the desk, looking down at what another man was writing, the latter appearing more like a clerk than a hunter. The captain turned his shaven face to look at him, a much younger face than that of Cadoc's, with well-combed hair tied behind his head, flowing in majestical black waves down his upper back. He smiled and approached, sword sheathed and wrapped on his back.
Cadoc, greetings. A pleasure as always, despite the rare occurrence. Hello there. Nothing much for me to do at the workshop. Nonsense! A veteran such as yourself possesses wise counsel many a young aspirant desperately needs.
He shook his hand, but the captain did not meet his eyes, instead looked indecisively somewhere behind him.
Even from someone like me. Oh, my friend, let's not dwell on old lessons or former work. I respect any counsel that could protect my brave hunters from any threat.
He leaned in closer and spoke a bit lower.
Even if it is from themselves. How is work these days? Anything the church permits me to know?
Ludwig chuckled.
Well now, did the cynicism come with age? The church withholds nothing from its wards, although I am no fool. What you mean are simply things the local benefits little from knowing, providing only unnecessary fear.
So how goes it?
The hunt bolsters them, Cadoc. You know it, don't you? Every man ought to know the sensation during his life of how it is to fight for what is just and pure. Even the women and the mothers, all that have the willpower, can take the opportunity for themselves.
He stretched out his arms vigorously, sounding as if he had rehearsed that same speech and announced it to countless others, although Cadoc was aware that most of what Ludwig said sounded as such.
Heard the forest cemetery behind the Grand Cathedral is all filled up. That's why houses are being demolished.
Ludwig's eyes briefly gained a profound look of sadness, but quickly transitioned into his eyes becoming fixed to something behind him. He followed something intently with his gaze that moved like a fly, but only for a moment, after which he spoke calmly, unaffected by his short-lived remorse.
Such thou topics you bring. No surprise. It is a scourge, after all. Yet we are still here. Right. I wanted to ask more about those hunters. Of course. But it was such a long time ago now. Not particularly. They won't stop go missing. Yes, well, you might agree that it is hard to keep track of all involved in such a grand institution, no? As a man who once made hunters disappear. I don't, actually.
The captain got a remorseful look, appearing as if regretting his words.
Pardon me. What I mean is that few enough have disappeared for it to be called circumstantial. The pattern you speak of is not as convincing to me as it was before. Or currently is, at any rate.
Kadok nodded.
Still a hunter, you are. None ever ceases to be completely, I like to think.
Ludwig commented with a friendly smirk.
Perhaps it is good what you do. I sincerely try to help, but there is little more I can say. I know of every single soul I... the Hunter of Hunters dispatches.
Uh-huh. Perhaps it is with her I should speak then. Ludwig pulled out a chair by the desk, then proceeded to fetch an adjacent one for himself and sat down. Outside one heard the wind blowing stronger due to the height of the tower, as well as the more subtle sound of a pen scratching on paper from the man still at his desk. After Ludwig had awaited him for a moment, Kadok too sat down. Perhaps I am a hunter still, but not like you.
A hunter is a hunter. Little is separating us other than methods. Whatever it is you hunt, we know the sensation all the same. Sharing it.
Yeah. But someday it must end. You catch the prey.
Then there comes another prey, and the hunt resumes. This is the understanding that unites us. Perhaps you feel as if you never truly caught your prey. With all due respect, I sense there is something weighing on you.
Nothing weighing. Time just passed. Things changed.
But the prey remains.
You suggest I fled? Ludwig closed his eyes, smiled and shook his head calmly.
Never have I thought you a coward. I could never have wished for a better man to possess your role. I meant that you are still here.
Yeah, and still hunting. I know.
But no longer a hunter of hunters. Not even a hunter of beasts?
Perhaps not. Or perhaps innocence. Beaked mask. Wood-carved mask of Eileen the Crow, Hunter of Hunters. The beak contains incense to mask scents of blood and beasts. Hunters of hunters dress as crows to suggest a sky burial. The first hunter of hunters came from a foreign land and gave the dead a virtuous native funeral ritual, rather than impose a blasphemous Yarnam burial service upon them, with the hope that former compatriots might be returned to the skies and find rest in a hunter's dream.